have been defending it for fun, for money, for clicks, for fame. Not all converts are created equal, and we should not. It's not just for Democrats to decide. It's for never-Trumpers who are conservative as well to decide. We should not be aligning with people who are losers, liars, and grifters, who have only come to see the light because either it's politically expedient or it's profitable or whatever. Now, I say to voters who have lost their appetite for Trump, absolutely. Congratulations. I'm sorry he disappointed you. I know exactly how he did by promising you things he's completely ignored. I get you. Come on over. The water's warm. But for the professional liars, losers, and grifters, no, we don't want you.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. Here we have S.E. Cupp, Joe Borelli, and a full panel on Abby Phillips' show going head-to-head on whether the Democratic Party should welcome MAGA defectors, and I want to share my honest take on what unfolds here. Underneath all the back and forth, this conversation is really about who gets to decide who belongs in a political movement and whether principle or pragmatism wins that argument. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know where you stand on this topic. All right, let's get into it.
It's no secret, many in MAGA aren't too thrilled with Donald Trump for some portions of the things he's been doing now, from the Epstein files to the economy and now the war. They say he promised to never start. Many of the loudest people who helped get him elected are starting to say they have buyer's remorse. Our friend S.E. had this to say to many of them after the president's threat to wipe out a civilization.
You and your buyer's remorse. Who would listen to you now? Who would listen to you? You got us here. You voted for him. You told everyone they have to vote for him, right? It's going to be World War III if you don't vote for him. Give me a break. No one cares what you have to say anymore. We told you so.
But some, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle, are opening their arms.
The thing that has been very fascinating, especially about Marjorie and Candace, is that they are not just coming out like the other ones that you'd mentioned, where they're saying this action is wrong, right? They're saying, I am done with you.
Yeah, it's like a values based, like
right.
This guy is bad, not like this policy is bad.
Right, and I think that we should give them credit for that.
The message cannot be, I told you so. The message has to be, welcome aboard. What else can we do together?
S.E., you are by no means a MAGA defector. You were never in
early and often to never Trump.
Early and often. You screamed no. No to what?
I have been out in these streets too long, Sarah.
In these streets?
I have been out in these streets since 2015, opposing this un-American, anti-democratic, fascistic garbage. And while at the same time, these people that they're mentioning, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, that name them, the long list, have been defending it for fun, for money, for clicks, for fame. Not all converts are created equal, and we should not. It's not just for Democrats to decide. It's for never-Trumpers who are conservative as well to decide. We should not be aligning with people who are losers, liars, and grifters, who have only come to see the light because either it's politically expedient or it's profitable or whatever. Now, I say to voters who have lost their appetite for Trump, absolutely. Congratulations. I'm sorry he disappointed you. I know exactly how he did by promising you things he's completely ignored. I get you. Come on over. The water's warm. But for the professional liars, losers, and grifters, no, we don't want you. And just because you've come to where we have been for 10 years doesn't mean you get to use us to launder your reputations. Not happening on my watch. And I don't like this conversation where it's like, well, shouldn't we give them credit? No credit. It's at the 11th hour. It's the 11th hour of this. He is a lame duck. He is gone in 2 years.
Guys.
What took you so long? I'm sorry. Somebody stop me or I will just...
How do you really feel?
Yeah, exactly.
This is personal. I've gotten death threats. I have lived this life at the expense of profession, at the expense of friendships, at the expense of money. I've done it. It's been hard, but it's my conscience telling me to do it. You don't get to flip a switch and say, I don't like him anymore. Can I be with you guys? No.
Do you see who she's talking about, who are constantly out there and were very supportive, and now they turn on some things, not all things, but they turn on some things very differently than you see, for example, a Liz Cheney or someone in that camp who...
Fundamentally different.
Yeah. Should the Democrats open their arms to, I mean, Liz Cheney is very conservative?
No. What I think S.E. is reacting to righteously is a deep frustration at the folks who enabled this.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden are trying to say, wash their hands.
Too much for me.
Who could have known that it would turn into this? Anybody. After January 6th, anybody could have known this if they chose to pay attention to what he'd said and what he'd done during the first term. Particularly if they were self-described conservatives.
Joe, yes.
But hold on, but a successful pro-democracy movement. Look at what just happened in Hungary. Look at the study of successful pro-democracy movements. They've got to be positive, patriotic, and inclusive. Positive, patriotic, and inclusive. So it's good to castigate the corruption and the rising costs and the cronyism and the chaos and cruelty, all of that. But you got to welcome people in and set a big tent message. And so there shouldn't be purity tests in a pro-democracy movement.
For voters. Marjorie Taylor Greene, like 5 minutes ago, was still saying that the insurrectionists were patriots.
Right.
Are patriots. These are people who would still vote for Trump if they were in his favor. I'm sorry. We need to be skeptical of the folks who are claiming us in their name. I'm not talking about voters. You're right.
I come at this from a foreign policy perspective. You know, I've, again, 10 years of following Trump. Everyone thinks they know what his foreign policy doctrine is, right? Oh, he campaigned against intervention. He campaigned he's going to be tough on China. Now he campaigned he's going to make a deal with China. No more wars, no more globalism. And sooner or later, everyone figures out that Donald Trump has no core foreign policy principles whatsoever. And they change all the time based on whoever he talked to last. Maybe he has a financial interest. Maybe his kids have a financial interest. Maybe he just gets talked into it by another foreign leader. And so, of course, if you stake your sort of foreign policy identity on no more wars, and we're not going to do Middle East interventions, we're not going to send young American men and women to fight and die in a far-off place for unclear reasons, unclear justifications. Well, the Iran war is the opposite of all of that. So he's forced all of these people who claimed that they were for Trump's foreign policy to either pick between their own integrity or following him to the exact opposite foreign policy. And some of them are going to follow him, and some of them are going to maintain whatever semblance of foreign policy integrity they have left. And they're both bad choices because they're both based on this premise that Donald Trump actually has a view of the world and America's role in it that isn't liable to change tomorrow. And guess what? It's going to change tomorrow again.
Joe, what do you make of what you're hearing from the Megyn Kellys and the Tucker Carlsons and Benny Johnson?
I think SC's right. I think these are people who are grifters. They're going for clicks, payments, or their own aggrandizement, and they flip because it's politically expedient for them or profitable for them, and that's fine. But as the only Trump voter here, I don't agree with anything any of you are saying. And the important thing is a new Q poll that came out on April 15th this week that shows the president still has the support of 88% of the Republican Party. Same poll at the end of the Biden term had him at 71%. Trump is immensely popular with the Republican base, despite all of the things you might say. None of you are Trump voters, and that's fine. But don't speak for Trump voters. We don't agree with what you're saying.
Let's start with what S.E. Cupp actually said, because it was the most electric thing in this entire clip, and nobody in that room really pushed back on it. She said, and I'm quoting her directly, "All converts are not created equal." And then she drew a hard line between two groups: voters who supported Trump and got burned, and, in her words, professional liars, losers, and grifters who spent years cheerleading for him and now want a seat at the table they spent a decade trying to burn down. That distinction is the whole argument. Everything else in this clip is just people dancing around it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The other panelists, not Borelli, he's irrelevant, we'll get to him, but the ones who are nominally on the same side as SE, they want to split the difference. They keep pushing this idea of positive, patriotic, and inclusive, and referencing successful pro-democracy movements. And they're basically saying you can't have a purity test if you want to win. And that sounds reasonable on the surface. It sounds like strategy. But SE isn't making a purity test argument. She's making a credibility argument. There is a difference. She's not saying these people believe the wrong things now. She's saying they don't actually believe anything. You cannot say Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly suddenly found their conscience. These are people who built entire media careers on the premise that Trump was the truth teller, the disruptor, the necessary force. And now that the audience is shifting, they're shifting. That's not a conversion, that's a rebrand. The crack in the panel's logic appears right around the moment someone brings up Marjorie Taylor Greene as an example of someone making a values-based break, saying not just that a policy is bad, but that Trump himself is bad. And Essie immediately points out that Marjorie Taylor Greene was still calling the January 6th insurrectionists patriots not 5 minutes ago. That's not a throwaway line. That is the entire game. Because if the standard for being welcomed into a pro-democracy coalition is just, I said something critical of Trump this week, then you've set the bar so low that the people you're letting in are going to reshape what you stand for before you've even figured out what you won. And then there's Joe Borelli. He's the only self-described Trump voter on the panel, and he does something that should have gotten more attention. He essentially agrees with SE that the Kellys and the Carlsons are grifters, going for clicks, payments, or their own aggrandizement.
His words. And then, in the same breath, he pivots to a Quinnipiac poll from April 15th showing Trump at 88% support among Republicans. He uses that number to argue that none of this hand-wringing matters because Trump's base is solid. But think about what he just did. He confirmed the grifter critique and then used Republican Party loyalty numbers to argue it doesn't matter. That's not a rebuttal. That's an admission dressed up as a counterpoint. He's saying, yes, these people are cynical operators, and also the cynical operation is still working. Those two things don't cancel each other out. They make Essie's case worse than she even made it herself.
Here's the real thing this conversation is about, and it's something every person watching this is dealing with right now in some form, whether it's at the dinner table or in their feed or in their own head. What do you do when someone who was wrong, loudly and publicly wrong and profitably wrong, shows up and says they've changed? The instinct to say, welcome, we need the numbers, is real. But SE is pointing to something older and harder, which is that movements that let their boundaries be defined by whoever shows up tend to end up reflecting whoever showed up. Democrats almost made that mistake with Liz Cheney, a decorated conservative who opposed Trump, but also, as the host pointed out, spent years saying terrible things about Democrats and their policies, and Kamala Harris campaigned with her anyway. That's not coalition building. That's confusion about what you're building toward. The people who benefit most from keeping this question muddy are the grifters themselves. As long as the conversation stays focused on should we be inclusive, nobody has to answer the harder question, inclusive toward what end? Because if the never-Trumpers who want in aren't also signing on to Medicare, to taxing the wealthy, to getting out of foreign wars, then you haven't gained allies, you've gained anchors. So here's the question for the comments, and I want a real answer. Should the Democratic Party set a policy floor for who gets welcomed in, or should the only requirement be that you oppose Trump? Yes or no?